My mother-in-law didn't know I was paying $7,200 a month. She handed me an eviction notice so her daughter could take my home. The next day I canceled every bill and packed all my furniture. The heavy oak dining table always felt cold, no matter how much warm food was placed on it. I remember the specific Monday night it all finally broke. The lighting in our dining room was dim, specifically set to highlight the expensive prime rib roast I had picked up from the upscale butcher downtown. I was 32 years old, exhausted from a 12-hour workday, but I still made sure the table looked like it belonged in a magazine. That was the rule in this house. Everything had to look perfect. My mother-in-law, Georgia, sat at the head of the table. She always claimed that seat, even though she didn't live with us full-time. She just visited often enough to make sure her presence was the dominant force in our home. She was 62, wore too much expensive perfume, and carried herself like a wealthy widow from an old-money family. The truth was, she was drowning in credit card debt, but perception is reality, right? My husband, Nolan, sat across from me. He was 34, handsome in that fading college athlete kind of way, but completely hollow on the inside. We were eating in silence, the only sound being the clinking of heavy silverware against porcelain plates. It was a normal, tense family dinner. Or so I thought. Halfway through her second glass of Merlot, Georgia cleared her throat. She reached into her designer handbag, pulled out a crisp, white envelope, and slid it across the smooth surface of the oak table. It stopped right next to my wine glass. I looked at it, then up at her. She had this tight, practiced smile on her face. The kind of smile a politician gives right before they tell you they are raising your taxes. I opened the envelope slowly. Inside was a single piece of paper. It was a printed document, typed up with a standard font, looking almost official but clearly drafted at home. At the top, in bold letters, it read eviction notice. I read the words, but my brain refused to process them immediately. It stated that I, Maeve, had 30 days to vacate the premises. I looked back at Georgia, a confused laugh caught in my throat. I asked her what kind of joke this was. Georgia took a delicate sip of her wine and dabbed her mouth with a cloth napkin. She looked at me with eyes as cold as river stones. She said, very politely, that it was not a joke at all. She explained that her daughter, Penelope, and Penelope's husband, Harrison, were finally expecting a baby. She said their apartment was simply too small for a growing family, and since Nolan and I did not have children, it only made sense for Penelope to take over the house. She spoke as if she was rearranging furniture, not my life. She said the house belonged in the family, and it was time for the real family to use it properly. I turned my head to look at Nolan. I waited for the explosion. I waited for the man I married to slam his fist on the table, to tear up that ridiculous piece of paper, and to tell his mother she had lost her mind. I waited for my husband to defend our home. But Nolan did nothing. He did not look at me. He did not look at his mother. He just kept his eyes glued to his half-eaten prime rib, slowly cutting a piece of meat he had no intention of eating. His silence was deafening. It filled the room, suffocating any hope I had left for our marriage. He knew this was happening. They had planned this without me. Georgia was evicting me from the very house I was keeping afloat, and Nolan was letting her do it. I did not scream. I did not throw my wine in her face. I just sat there, feeling a strange, absolute stillness wash over my entire body. Later that night, I did not go to our master bedroom. I walked quietly down the hall and went straight into the guest room, shutting the door behind me. I lay down on the mattress in the dark, staring up at the ceiling fan spinning in slow, lazy circles. Anyone else would be crying their eyes out, hyperventilating, calling their best friend in a panic. But I did not shed a single tear. I just felt a profound, heavy clarity. To understand why I reacted with silence instead of rage, you have to understand where I came from. I did not grow up with heavy oak dining tables or prime rib dinners. I grew up in a world of constant anxiety. My childhood was a blur of cramped apartments, past due notices taped to front doors, and moving in the middle of the night because my mother could not make rent. We were poor. Not the romanticized, working-class poor you see in movies, but the bone-grinding, humiliating kind of poor. The kind where you learn to lie to your teachers about why you don't have lunch. The kind where you pretend you are not cold because you know turning on the heat will cause a fight about the electric bill. Because of that, when I finally clawed my way out of poverty, I developed a massive blind spot. I equated financial stability with love. I equated a big, beautiful house with a happy family. When I met Nolan, he came from a world that looked perfect on the outside. His family had country club memberships, they went on ski trips, and they had a large, manicured house. I thought that by marrying him, I was finally buying my ticket into normalcy. I wanted a real family so badly that I was willing to overlook all the red flags. I became a corporate risk consultant. It is not a flashy job title, and nobody ever really understands what it means. But let me tell you, it pays incredibly well. I manage millions of dollars in risk mitigation for massive tech firms. I work long hours, I negotiate brutal contracts, and I am very, very good at my job. But Georgia did not know that. She always assumed I was just some low-level data entry clerk pushing papers at a desk. She thought my job was cute, a little hobby to keep me busy until I gave her grandchildren. I never corrected her. I never bragged about my income because Nolan's fragile ego could not handle it. He liked playing the big, successful provider, and I loved him enough to let him play the role. I thought that was what a good wife did. I thought protecting his pride was more important than my own recognition. So, I kept my mouth shut and my head down. I let them think they were the royalty, and I was just the lucky peasant they allowed into their castle. Lying there in the dark guest room, the ghost of my poverty-stricken childhood sat on the edge of the bed with me. I realized that my desperate need for a picture-perfect family had turned me into the ultimate victim of a financial scam. I was not a wife. I was a wallet. I had bought my way into a family that despised me, and the worst part was, I had handed them the receipt. The sick joke of it all was that I had been paying for their entire illusion for the last 24 months. The whole house of cards rested on my bank account. It all started 2 years ago, right around the start of the autumn season. Nolan used to be a regional sales manager for a medical supply company. He made decent money, wore nice suits, and loved telling everyone how important he was. But then the company restructured. His entire division was cut. Just like that, the golden boy was out of a job. At first, we thought it was a minor setback. He got severance pay, and we figured he would bounce right back. But the weeks turned into months, and the job market was brutal. Every rejection chipped away at his pride. He stopped wearing suits. Then he stopped shaving. Eventually, he stopped getting off the couch. He slipped into a deep, ugly depression. He would spend all day playing video games and drinking cheap beer, avoiding eye contact when I came home from work. The bills, however, did not care about his depression. The mortgage company did not care that he was feeling inadequate. That was when I made the biggest mistake of my life. I stepped in. I did not want him to feel like a failure, so I devised a plan. Every single month, on the first day of the month, I would secretly transfer $7,200 from my private business account into our joint checking account. That number, $7,200, became the invisible baseline of our existence. It covered everything. It covered the massive mortgage on the house that Georgia insisted we buy because it was in the right neighborhood. It covered the homeowner association fees. It covered the property taxes. It covered the luxury car lease Nolan refused to give up. And it covered Georgia. That was the most pathetic part. Nolan had promised his mother years ago that he would take over the payments for her exclusive country club membership as a sign of his success. Even when he lost his job, he begged me not to cancel it. He said if Georgia found out he was broke, it would kill him. He said she would never look at him the same way. So, I paid for it. I paid the monthly dues so my mother-in-law could go play tennis and drink mimosas with her wealthy friends and brag about her successful son, all while the money was quietly draining out of my consulting contracts. Nolan and I had a silent agreement. We never talked about the transfers. When the bills were paid from the joint account, we pretended it was our money. We pretended he was still contributing. He got to keep his dignity, and I got to keep the peace. But over time, the gratitude faded. The transfers just became expected. He started acting like he was still the breadwinner, snapping at me if I bought a slightly more expensive brand of coffee, while he was literally living on my charity. I watched him shrink into a resentful, hollow shell of a man, while I worked myself to the bone to fund a lifestyle that was entirely fake. I had built a fortress of financial security around him, and instead of thanking me, he used it to lock me out. When you are living a lie that big, it does not explode all at once. It bleeds you dry through 1,000 tiny paper cuts. Lying in the guest room, staring at the shadows on the wall, my mind started compiling a highlight reel of every insult I had swallowed over the past 2 years. Every time I smiled and nodded, every time I bit my tongue, it all came rushing back with crystal clarity. I thought about Christmas last year. I had worked overtime for 3 months straight, taking on extra corporate clients just so we could host the perfect holiday. I spent over $2,000 on organic groceries, premium decorations, and a massive tree. I cooked for 2 days straight. On Christmas morning, we sat around the fireplace that I paid to maintain. Georgia sat in the center of the room, handing out gifts like a generous queen. She handed her daughter, Penelope, a velvet box containing beautiful diamond stud earrings. Then she turned to me, offering a polite smile, and handed me a gift bag. Inside was a cheap, generic lavender lotion set from a discount pharmacy. The seal was half broken. It was a regift. I remember looking at the lotion, then looking at the diamonds she bought with money she had borrowed from Nolan, which was actually my money. I smiled and said thank you. I swallowed the paper cut. But the biggest insult, the one that really secured the foundation of my revenge, happened during the summer renovation. The roof of the house was leaking, and the central air conditioning unit died right in the middle of a massive heat wave. The house was uninhabitable. The contractor gave us an estimate of $45,000 for a complete repair and replacement. Georgia panicked. She said it would ruin the home's value, but she adamantly refused to let Nolan dip into what she thought were his savings. She told him, right in front of me, that a smart man never touches his investments for maintenance. So, I stepped up again. But this time, my accountant gave me some very specific advice. Because I worked from home and used a significant portion of the house as my consulting office, he suggested I pay for the repairs directly through my limited liability company. He said it would be an excellent tax deduction. So, I wrote a corporate check for $45,000 directly to the roofing and HVAC contractors. My name and my company's name was on every single invoice, permit, and legal receipt for the structural improvement of that property. Georgia waved it off at the time. She said paperwork did not matter as long as the house was fixed. She had no idea that in the eyes of the law, paperwork is the only thing that matters. She thought she was preserving her family's wealth. She did not realize she was legally giving me a massive piece of equity in her precious family estate. Those paper cuts did not kill me. They just made me completely numb. Around midnight, the door to the guest room slowly creaked open. The hallway light spilled across the floor, outlining Nolan's silhouette. He stood in the doorway for a long time, shifting his weight from one foot to the other. I did not move. I did not speak. I just lay there in the dark, watching him. Finally, he stepped inside and sat on the edge of the mattress. The mattress sank under his weight, and I felt a physical revulsion, a deep desire to pull my legs away so we would not touch. He let out a heavy sigh, running a hand through his hair. He tried to use his soft, reasonable voice. The one he used when he knew he was wrong but wanted to manipulate his way out of it. He said, "Look, Maeve, I know Mom was a little blunt tonight, but you have to look at the big picture." I remained silent. He took that as permission to keep digging his own grave. "Penelope is really struggling," he continued, looking at the floor instead of my eyes. "Harrison is between jobs again, and the baby is coming. They are family. They need this space. It is just for a year, maybe 2. You can easily get a small, nice apartment downtown. It will be fun for you, like a bachelor pad. I will stay here and help them get settled." I listened to his words, and I realized something profound. He was not asking me to leave. He was managing me. He was treating me like a logistical problem that needed solving. He wanted me to go pay rent somewhere else, while continuing to pump $7,200 a month into his bank account so he could play the generous brother and the dutiful son in the house I bought. As I listened to him breathe, trying to convince me of this absolute insanity, I experienced the exact physiological feeling of falling out of love. It was not a fiery explosion. It was not a dramatic shattering of a heart. It was a cooling down. It felt like someone had reached into my chest, found the switch connected to my emotions, and simply flicked it to the off position. The hum of anxiety, the desperation to please him, the fear of losing my family, it all just stopped. The silence in my head was beautiful. I realized I was not a wife to him. I was a utility provider. I was the water company. I was the electric grid. And you do not fall in love with the electric grid. You just expect it to work. Okay, I said quietly into the darkness. Nolan let out a breath of relief, the tension leaving his shoulders. He thought he had won. He patted my leg through the blanket. I knew you would understand, he whispered. You are always so logical. He stood up, closed the door, and went back to the master bedroom to sleep soundly in the bed I had purchased. I did not sleep a single second that night. My eyes were wide open, staring into the blackness of the room. I was not crying. I was calculating. My mind was moving with the cold, precise efficiency of a machine. If they wanted me to leave, I would leave. But I was not going to walk out the door with a suitcase and a broken heart. I was going to remove every single atom of my existence from their lives. I was going to pull the financial plug on the entire operation. I reached for my phone on the nightstand. The screen brightness stung my eyes, but I ignored it. I opened my banking application. I looked at my main consulting account. The numbers were large, solid, and comforting. Then, I looked at the joint account I shared with Nolan. There was currently about $400 in it. Just enough to cover his beer and golf balls for the week. In exactly 3 days, on the 1st of the month, my automated system was scheduled to transfer the massive $7,200 payment to cover the upcoming mortgage, utilities, and country club fees. I tapped the screen. I went to the scheduled transfers menu. I found the recurring monthly payment. I pressed the delete button. A small window popped up asking if I was sure I wanted to cancel this permanent transaction. I did not hesitate. I tapped confirm. Just like that, the lifeblood of Nolan's fake reality was severed. But that was not enough. Money was abstract. I needed them to feel my absence physically. I needed the house to reflect the emptiness of their souls. I mentally walked through every room in that massive house. The living room, the dining room, the patio, the master bedroom. I cataloged every single item I had purchased with my own money. Not joint money. My money. The massive beige sectional sofa that Georgia loved to sit on and judge people from? I bought it. The 75-inch television Nolan played his video games on all day? I bought it. The French door refrigerator currently holding my expensive prime rib? I paid for that too. They had slowly replaced all their old, cheap college furniture with high-end luxury goods, all funded by my silent consulting contracts. They wanted the house for Penelope. Fine. They could have the walls, the floors, and the roof. But they were not getting the lifestyle. By 4 in the morning, my plan was set in stone. It was perfect because it required no yelling, no arguments, and no messy emotional breakdowns. I was simply going to grant their wish. They wanted me gone. I would give them exactly what they asked for, but I would do it on my terms. I finally closed my eyes as the first light of dawn began to creep through the window blinds. I was not a victim anymore. I was an architect of consequences. If you are enjoying this story of quiet revenge, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. And before we get into the massive fallout in the next act, let me know in the comments, what city are you watching this from? Every comment helps the video reach more people. Thank you so much. Now, let's get back to the story. Tuesday morning arrived with a cruel, bright sunshine that completely ignored the wreckage of my marriage. I woke up at 6 o'clock, took a long, hot shower in the guest bathroom, and put on my favorite tailored suit. I went downstairs to the kitchen and brewed a fresh pot of the expensive dark roast coffee Nolan loved. I was playing the role of the dutiful, obedient wife one last time. It was like putting on a costume for a play that was about to close permanently. Nolan dragged himself out of the master bedroom around 8 o'clock. He looked terrible. His eyes were bloodshot, and he had the puffy face of a man who drank too much cheap beer the night before to drown out his own guilt. But he still put on his crisp, white golf polo. It was Tuesday, which meant it was his day to go hit golf balls with his unemployed buddies at the driving range. He kept up this pathetic routine to maintain the illusion that he was a busy man networking for high-level executive positions. In reality, he was just hiding from his failure. He poured himself a cup of my coffee, avoided looking me directly in the eyes, and muttered something about having a promising lead on a new job. I smiled. A genuine, bright smile. I told him I hoped it went well. I even walked over and gave him a quick peck on the cheek. He seemed incredibly relieved. In his mind, my calmness meant I had surrendered. He thought the eviction notice had worked, and I was quietly accepting my fate as the discarded starter wife. He grabbed his golf clubs, told me he would be back around 4 or 5 in the afternoon, and drove off in the luxury SUV that I was paying the lease on. I stood in the driveway and watched his car turn the corner, disappearing from my life. The moment he was out of sight, my smile vanished. I walked back inside, locked the front door, and pulled out my phone. At exactly 9 o'clock, a massive, pristine white moving truck backed into my driveway. I had not hired some cheap, hourly guys from the internet. I had hired a premium, white-glove relocation service. It cost me $5,000 up front, but the efficiency was worth every single penny. 5 men in matching uniforms stepped out, carrying heavy-duty boxes, massive rolls of bubble wrap, and moving blankets. The foreman, a tall man named Marcus, walked up to the porch holding a digital tablet. I introduced myself and handed him a detailed, printed inventory list I had typed up in the middle of the night. I told Marcus he had exactly 7 hours to pack up everything on that list and load it into the truck. He looked around the massive house, then looked at the list and nodded. He blew a whistle, and the crew descended on the house like an organized army. The erasure had officially begun. The next few hours were a symphony of dismantling. The sound of heavy tape ripping from dispensers echoed through the high ceilings of the house. I did not lift a single finger to pack. I just walked from room to room with a cup of coffee, pointing at things, acting as the director of a demolition project. I started in the living room. Georgia absolutely adored the massive, custom-made beige sectional sofa. She used to host her book club on that sofa, sipping wine and accepting compliments on her exquisite taste in interior design. It took 3 men to lift it and carry it out the front door. Next went the hand-woven Persian rug underneath it, the solid wood coffee table, and the massive 80-inch flat-screen television. Then we moved to the kitchen. I directed the crew to empty the contents of the massive French door refrigerator into garbage bags, and then they strapped the entire $3,000 appliance to a dolly and rolled it out. I bought that refrigerator. I took the high-end espresso machine, the imported pots and pans, and every single piece of silver cutlery. I went upstairs to the master bedroom. I instructed them to disassemble the expensive king-size teak wood bed frame and the premium memory foam mattress. I was incredibly careful not to take anything that belonged to Nolan before we were married. I was executing a financial extraction, not a petty theft. By the time they were done with the master bedroom, the only things left were Nolan's old, lumpy college mattress thrown on the bare carpet, a cheap plastic dresser he had since his early 20s, and a mountain of his unwashed clothes piled in the corner. The house was being stripped down to its absolute truth. And the truth was incredibly ugly and bare. At exactly 2 o'clock in the afternoon, my phone buzzed in my pocket. It was a text message from Georgia. It read, "Good afternoon, Maeve. I hope you are having a productive day. Let us discuss your move-out date this weekend over brunch. We can help you find a suitable apartment." I looked up from my phone. 2 movers were currently carrying the heavy oak dining table out the front door, the exact same table where she had handed me the eviction notice just 14 hours prior. I felt a laugh bubble up in my chest. She really thought she was holding all the cards. She thought she was the general commanding the battlefield. I did not reply to her message. I just slipped the phone back into my pocket and told the movers to make sure they grabbed the patio furniture in the backyard. The house was no longer a home. It was a hollow, echoing shell. By 4 o'clock, the moving truck was packed, locked, and driving away toward a secure storage facility I had rented across town. I stood in the middle of the living room. The silence was absolute. Without the furniture, the rugs, and the heavy curtains, every sound bounced off the bare walls. The house smelled like cardboard and dust. I placed my single travel suitcase by the front door, holding only my clothes and my laptop. And then I waited. At 4:30 sharp, I heard the familiar hum of Nolan's SUV pulling into the driveway. I heard the heavy car door slam, followed by his footsteps on the concrete walkway. The front door unlocked, and Nolan pushed it open, carrying a half-empty gym bag. He stopped dead in his tracks. The gym bag slipped from his shoulder and hit the hardwood floor with a loud thud. He stood in the entryway, his mouth slightly open, his eyes darting frantically around the empty space. He looked at the bare walls where the television used to be. He looked at the empty space where his mother's favorite sofa used to sit. What is this?" he stammered, his voice cracking. He stepped further into the house, spinning around in circles. "Maeve, what did you do? Were we robbed?" I stood by the kitchen island, or rather, the empty space where the kitchen bar stools used to be. I looked at him, completely unbothered. "No, Nolan," I said evenly. "We were not robbed. I am moving out. Just like your mother requested." His shock quickly mutated into a violent, panicked anger. His face turned bright red. "You crazy bitch," he yelled, the echo making his voice sound even louder. "You cannot just steal all of our furniture. Mom said you had 30 days. What is wrong with you?" "I did not steal anything," I replied, keeping my voice lower and calmer than his, which only infuriated him more. "I only took what belongs to me." "It belongs to us," he screamed, stepping toward me with his fists clenched. "We bought that stuff. We bought that television. We bought that bed." I did not flinch. I slowly reached into my suit jacket pocket and pulled out my phone. I opened my banking application. I navigated to the joint checking account history. I held the bright screen up between us. "No, Nolan," I said, my voice dripping with cold, hard facts. "You did not buy anything. Look at the screen." He stopped walking. He squinted at the phone. I slowly scrolled through 24 months of transaction history. Every single month, on the first of the month, a deposit of $7,200 appeared from my corporate account. I watched his eyes track the numbers. I watched his brain try to process the reality he had ignored for 2 years. "You see those deposits?" I asked gently, like a teacher explaining math to a slow student. "That is my money. I paid the mortgage. I paid the car lease. I paid the electric bill. I paid for the groceries. I even paid your mother's ridiculous country club membership so you could pretend you were still a big shot. Every single piece of furniture in this house was purchased with my money after you lost your job and gave up on life." The anger drained out of his face, replaced by a sickening, pale horror. His jaw trembled. You paid for everything?" he whispered. "Everything," I confirmed, putting the phone back in my pocket. "You evicted the bank, Nolan. And the bank is taking its assets and leaving." I picked up my suitcase, walked past him, and out the front door. I did not look back. I drove for an hour, putting a solid 45 miles between myself and that empty, echoing house. I checked into a luxury hotel located in the downtown business district of the neighboring city. I requested a corner suite on the top floor. The room was immaculate, quiet, and smelled of fresh linen and expensive citrus air freshener. It was the exact opposite of the chaotic, desperate energy I had just left behind. I tipped the bellboy generously, locked the heavy wooden door, and walked over to the large mahogany desk facing the floor-to-ceiling window. The city lights were just starting to blink on below me. I did not order room service. I did not pour myself a glass of wine to celebrate. There was still work to be done. The physical extraction was complete, but the financial extraction was about to begin. I opened my laptop, connected to the high-speed hotel internet, and created a new spreadsheet. I titled it Project Disconnect. Over the next 3 hours, I systematically hunted down every single financial tie I had to that house and to that family. I started with the utilities. Since I was the one paying the bills, the accounts were all registered under my email address and my name. I logged into the regional power company's portal. I navigated to the service termination page. I clicked the button to stop electrical service at the house, effective immediately. The system warned me that a final shutoff would occur within 48 hours. I smiled and clicked confirm. I did the exact same thing for the municipal water and trash collection services. Next was the internet. Nolan could not survive without his high-speed gaming internet. I logged into the provider's portal, canceled the premium fiber optic plan, and scheduled the service to be cut at midnight. Then I went after the luxuries. I canceled the premium cable package, the 4 different streaming services we subscribed to, and the expensive home security monitoring system. But my absolute favorite cancellation of the night was the country club. I called the membership director directly and left a very polite, clear voicemail. I stated that my credit card was no longer authorized to pay for Georgia's monthly dues, and any future charges would be reported as fraudulent. I then logged into my bank and formally put a hard stop on the joint checking account. I transferred the remaining $400 to my personal account, leaving the joint account balance at absolute zero. I closed my laptop. The beast was officially starved. I finally ordered a rare steak from room service, ate it in silence while looking over the city, and slept for 10 straight hours. The collapse did not happen instantly. It took about 72 hours for the reality of my administrative strike to hit them. I did not have to be there to see it. I could monitor the chaos entirely through my email notifications and the frantic voicemails left on my phone. The internet went first. At exactly 1 minute past midnight on Thursday, my phone vibrated with an automated email from the provider confirming the disconnection. I could almost picture Nolan sitting in the dark, screaming at his television as his multiplayer game suddenly crashed, leaving him completely cut off from the digital world he used to hide in. Then came the utilities. Friday afternoon was unseasonably hot. According to a voicemail Nolan left me, screaming in a panic, the power company sent a technician to physically cut the line. Because I closed the account, it triggered a final bill. When the system tried to auto-draft the final bill from the now-empty joint checking account, it bounced. The power company did not care about family drama, they cared about unpaid balances. The electricity was shut off. The central air conditioning died. The massive house turned into a dark, suffocating greenhouse. The true poetry of the situation happened on Saturday morning. This was the day Georgia, Penelope, and Harrison were supposed to start moving Penelope's things into the house. According to a furious, barely coherent text message from Georgia, they arrived with a rented moving van, expecting to find a clean, beautifully furnished, air-conditioned luxury home waiting for them. Instead, they walked into a sweltering, dark, empty cavern. There were no lights. There was no water pressure to flush the toilets. There was not a single chair for pregnant Penelope to sit on. The house was dead. Georgia blew up my phone. She sent me 20 text messages in the span of an hour. At first, they were demanding. Maeve, turn the power back on immediately. Penelope is pregnant. This is child abuse. When I ignored those, her tone shifted to desperate bartering. We can talk about the furniture, just please call the electric company. Nolan does not have the deposit money to start a new account. She was right. Opening a new utility account required a credit check and a security deposit. Nolan's credit was ruined from 2 years of unemployment, and he had exactly $0 to his name. They were sitting in a $1 million house, sweating in the dark, surrounded by bare floors, completely paralyzed because the invisible infrastructure they took for granted had evaporated. I read every single message from the cool, air-conditioned comfort of my hotel suite, drinking sparkling water and feeling absolutely nothing but a deep, satisfying peace. I knew Nolan would eventually find me. We used to share a family phone plan, and even though I had separated my line, I knew he still had the login to track the device's location. I wanted him to find me. I needed to deliver the final piece of paperwork in person. On Sunday morning, As I was sitting in the hotel lobby drinking a cappuccino, he walked through the revolving glass doors. He looked like a man who had survived a shipwreck. He was wearing the same golf polo from Tuesday, now wrinkled and stained with sweat. He had not shaved in days. The dark circles under his eyes made him look 10 years older. He spotted me, practically ran across the marble floor, and collapsed into the armchair across from me. He looked around at the wealthy hotel guests, trying to keep his voice down, but the panic was leaking out of him. "You have to stop this," he begged, leaning forward, his hands shaking. "You are humiliating us, Maeve." The neighbors saw the power company truck. Penelope is crying nonstop. Mom is having a nervous breakdown. "You made your point. Please, just come home and turn the lights back on. We can fix this." I took a slow sip of my coffee. I looked at this man I once promised to love through sickness and health. I realized his sickness was entitlement, and there was no cure for it. I was handed an eviction notice, Nolan, I said softly, my voice completely steady. "I am just following your mother's instructions." I vacated the premises. "She did not mean literally strip the house bare and shut off the water," he hissed, slamming his hand on the small table. "You are starving your own family." "You are not my family," I corrected him. "I was your bank. And the bank is closed." He reached out to grab my arm, a desperate attempt at physical manipulation. I leaned back, out of his reach, and calmly pulled a thick, manila envelope from my leather tote bag. I slid it across the glass table. "This is from my attorney," I said. Nolan stared at the envelope like it was a live bomb. He slowly opened the flap and pulled out the legal documents. It was a formal, itemized demand letter. It outlined every single financial contribution I had made to the property over the last 24 months, with a specific focus on the $45,000 structural repair I had paid for directly. "What is this?" he whispered, his eyes scanning the legal jargon. "That is a formal request for reimbursement," I explained. "If you and your mother want to keep that house, you owe me over $200,000 in back-owed living expenses and structural equity. If you cannot pay it within 60 days, my lawyer will force the sale of the property to satisfy the debt." Nolan dropped the papers on the table. The last remaining ounce of fight drained out of him. "You planned this from the start," he accused me, his voice hollow. "No," I replied, standing up and picking up my coffee. "I just took notes while you were taking advantage of me. Tell Georgia good luck with the baby." The legal fallout was swift and incredibly brutal. Georgia and Nolan did exactly what I expected them to do. They panicked and hired a cheap, aggressive lawyer to try and intimidate me. They scheduled a mediation meeting at my attorney's office, hoping to bully me into dropping my demands and turning the power back on. I sat in the glass conference room, wearing a sharp navy suit, watching them walk in. Georgia looked significantly older. Without her expensive country club blowouts and professional manicures, the facade of the wealthy matriarch had completely crumbled. Nolan just looked defeated, staring at the floor. Their lawyer started blustering immediately, threatening to sue me for marital abandonment and demanding alimony for Nolan. My attorney, an incredibly sharp man who charged $600 an hour, just let him talk until he ran out of breath. Then, my attorney opened his folder and pulled out the invoices for the roof and the air conditioning unit. He slid them across the table. He explained to their lawyer, using very slow, simple words, that this was not a standard divorce case involving joint marital funds. He explained that Maeve's limited liability company paid $45,000 directly to contractors to improve a property owned primarily by Georgia and Nolan. Because Georgia had allowed me to file that improvement under my corporate taxes to save herself money, she had legally acknowledged my financial interest in the physical structure of the home. My attorney dropped the legal hammer. He informed them that he had already filed a mechanic's lien against the property. The color completely washed out of Georgia's face. She finally understood the trap she had walked into. She could not sell the house. She could not refinance the house to get cash. She could not even take out a second mortgage to pay the past-due electric bill. The house was legally paralyzed until my $45,000 debt was paid in full, plus interest and legal fees. And because I had stopped paying the monthly mortgage, the bank was already sending pre-foreclosure notices. Georgia looked at me, her eyes filled with a mixture of pure hatred and absolute terror. "You calculated, evil little girl," she hissed across the table. "You stole my home." "I did not steal anything, Georgia," I replied calmly, folding my hands on the table. "You handed me an eviction notice. I just made sure you could not afford to live there once I was gone. You wanted the house for your real family. Now you have it. Enjoy the dark." The meeting ended 5 minutes later. There was nothing left to negotiate. It was a perfect, inescapable checkmate. Fast forward 6 months. The dust has finally settled, and the landscape of all our lives has drastically changed. Without my $7,200 a month, the illusion of their wealth collapsed with terrifying speed. The bank aggressively pursued the foreclosure. To avoid total bankruptcy, Georgia and Nolan were forced to sell the house in a massive rush. Because of the lien I had placed on the property, the proceeds from the sale had to pay off my corporate debt first. After the bank took their massive share, and I took my legal cut, there was barely enough money left for Georgia to buy a used car. The great family estate is gone. Penelope and Harrison never got to move in. They are currently renting a tiny, cramped 2-bedroom apartment near the airport, constantly complaining about the noise and the lack of space. Georgia's pride was entirely shattered. She could not face her wealthy friends after the humiliating public sale of her home. She was forced to move into a very basic, government-subsidized senior living facility on the bad side of town. As for Nolan, he finally had to get a job. He is currently working as an assistant manager at a discount shoe store, living in a cheap studio apartment, entirely cut off from the luxury he felt entitled to. And me? My life has never been better. The divorce was finalized quickly because they had absolutely no money to fight me in court. I took the money from the house lien and put a massive down payment on a beautiful, sunlit penthouse condo right in the heart of the city. I decorated it exactly how I wanted, with modern, sleek furniture and vibrant colors. There are no heavy oak tables. There are no beige sectionals. Every morning, I wake up in my own bed, drink my expensive coffee, and look out over the city's skyline. I still work hard as a risk consultant, but now every single dollar I earn stays in my bank account. The silence in my new home is not cold or echoing. It is incredibly peaceful. I learned the hardest lesson of my life. You cannot buy a family, and you should never set yourself on fire just to keep ungrateful people warm. I am no longer infrastructure. I am free. Looking back at the empty house, the unpaid bills, and the shattered egos of a family that thought I was disposable, I have to ask, was I too harsh? Did I take the financial revenge too far, or did I just give them exactly what they asked for? Am I wrong? Thank you for listening to my story. If you haven't subscribed yet, please hit that subscribe button, like the video, and let me know your verdict in the comments below.